everyone. Welcome to our seminar, Implementation of Dual Vocational Education and Training. I'm your trainer Hanna Obara. I come from Bildungswerk der baden-württembergischen Wirtschaft, in short BIWE. BIWE is the training and education organization of employers from Germany's southwestern state of Baden-Württemberg. Thanks to the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development via SEQUA GmbH, we were able to create the seminar for you. Today I will talk about how to write a competency-based in-company training plan. You have already learned about how to choose the career in which you want to implement dual training. The next step is to write a training plan for the chosen career. First, we will clarify what competency actually means. Then we will do some practical exercises and in the end talk about how it is possible to measure and evaluate the performance of the apprentices. After all that, you should be able to write a competency-based in-company training plan. To evaluate the skills of an apprentice, it is important to look at their competencies. So what exactly is a competency and how do we evaluate it? While answering those questions, we look at the example of an apprentice that is training to become a waiter. We define competency as the connection between knowledge, attitude, and the ability of carrying out a task. Knowledge means the understanding and information one has on a specific topic. How much does one, for example, know about the ingredients of a certain dish? Attitude and ability refers to the soft and the hard skills. Does the apprentice have the sufficient communicative skills of recommending a dish and later on serve it professionally? In order to be able to recommend a dish, you need to have the knowledge about the dish itself. That shows how the theoretical part and the practical part are well connected. In our seminars, we show our participants two ways to formulate a learning content. Version 1 says, the apprentice can recommend dishes and serve them. The second version says, dish selection and service. Which version is easier to evaluate? So far, everybody told us the first one. Imagine an in-company trainer needs to evaluate her apprentice. With version 1, she will be able to give a more specific evaluation than with version 2. And this, in a nutshell, is one very big advantage of working with competencies. Here you can see a more graphic representation of the definition of competency. As you can see, the three circles of knowledge, skills, and attitude are overlapping. The part in the middle, where all three circles overlap at the same spot, represents the competency, the connection of all three aspects. Now it's your turn. I would like you to think about which different kind of fields and topics a waiter has to be trained in. And again, which competencies are required for those fields. You can now see the fields guest, food, and room. Of course, there can also be others, but let us work now with those three fields. Starting with guest. Let us think about which competencies are important when dealing with guests. Of course, the language and wording needs to be appropriate and can differ from the location of the restaurant. In a small village in Germany, English shouldn't be a requirement. But again, if a waiter works at the airport and doesn't know English, it might be hard to communicate with the guests. The waiter also always needs to be polite and have good manners when taking an order or serving food. He needs to have good communication skills, especially in situations when guests are not happy and complain about things. Then he needs to be able to react professionally and give a reply that calms guests down. Those are only few aspects that are important when interacting with guests. Furthermore, he should be able to do some calculations when it comes, for example, to giving guests their change. It doesn't seem professional when a waiter takes too long with giving back the right amount of money. Another field is food. A waiter should know about the preparation and content of dishes he is serving. Let us, for example, say a pregnant lady comes for lunch and would like to have a recommendation. The waiter cannot recommend her a dish with a steak that is not well done. He should also be able to serve the dish in the right way, how to put the cutlery, on which side of the guest to stand when serving the food, etc. It is important to know the food laws and hygiene requirements, which leads me to the third field, room. And this refers, for example, to logistical requirements. A waiter should have good organizational skills, so he can manage a high number of guests by booking and arranging tables accordingly, decorating the restaurant and others. Air and temperature is also listed as a point here. Depending on the weather outside and the behavior of guests, do they seem to be comfortable, or are many guests still wearing their jacket? The waiter should adapt the inside temperature accordingly. All those competencies shall be evaluated during and in the end of the training. After having determined competencies a waiter should have, we now have to think about how to define and write them down as preparation for the training plan. Thinking of the previous slide and the competencies we named, you can now start listing as many tasks as you can think of. Of course, always referring to one of the competencies. I suggest that you always start your sentence with, "The apprentice is able to." That way it refers specifically to the skills of the apprentice. Then a general formulation like earlier the dish selection and service formulation. Thinking of the previous slide, one task could be, for example, the waiter can set up a table according to the restaurant requirements. Here you can see 3 competency-based tasks an apprentice should be evaluated in. The apprentice can recommend dishes and serve them. The apprentice plans her work steps according to economic and ecological aspects. And the apprentice understands food law requirements and acts accordingly when serving dishes. Still, as part of writing the training plan, we now have to categorize the listed tasks in order to choose the ones that will later on be listed in the in-company training plan. So we have to decide which competency should be trained in school and which in the company. Of course, some competencies are being trained both at school and in the company, but you should still try and determine what should be trained where. Let us start with number 1. Looking at our 3 tasks on this slide, I suggest that task 1 should be trained in the company, the restaurant. So the recommendation can be done according to the menu they have. Also, serving food is a very practical activity that is being carried out in the company. There is the second task being trained. That is already a bit harder to decide. Knowledge about economic and ecological aspects is usually being communicated in school. Creating a work plan on the other side, more likely in the company. That's why I would still determine this task as a task to be trained in the company. The third task now would be trained in school, since it's mainly about theoretical background and knowledge. After having defined the tasks, decided whether they should be mainly trained in the school or in the company, we now have to think about how we measure the performance of the apprentice and do the marking. First thing for the trainer is to observe the apprentice. How does the apprentice carry out her tasks, especially over a long period of time? Because if you only look at the performance of 1 or 2 days, it might not tell you the truth about the apprentice's competency. As a next step, you document the student's performance by giving out marks. The marking usually follows the marking system of your country. In Germany, for example, you evaluate with the marks 1 until 6, while 1 is the best mark and 6 is the worst. After the trainer has assessed and marked the performance of the apprentice, it is now important to discuss the results with the apprentice. The trainer gives feedback to the apprentice and also listens to what the apprentice has to say regarding the feedback. A constructive feedback should help the apprentice improve specific skills when needed. We have now done all preparations that were needed to start writing the competency-based in-company training plan. We have brainstormed about tasks related to the required competencies. We have listed them and categorized them. The next step now is writing the plan. This slide shows a competency-based in-company training plan for a dual training in plumbing we did in Rwanda. The first column lists the specific competency that is being implemented. For example, gathering and structuring tools and material from the storage. The second column now describes the activities that are suggested to be carried out in order to evaluate the apprentice's competencies. To evaluate whether the apprentice is able to gather and structure tools from the storage, he shall explain the process of doing that to the trainer. After that, after having assessed the apprentice, the trainer writes down the corresponding mark. The trainer continues like that with all competencies and activities listed there. As you can see, on top of the table is written month 4. That shows that there are specific competencies according to the month of the training. Sometimes the competencies might be repetitive, but usually you find more basic competencies in the first months, while the last months the competencies and tasks are more complex. Going back to our example of an apprentice becoming a waiter, a competency in the first month could be serving 2 dishes at the same time. A competency in the end of the training could be setting up the room for a group of 20 people. If you have such a standardized training plan, it is much easier to compare the competencies of several apprentices. Why should we evaluate attitudes? This refers to the soft skills of the apprentice. You can again see a list of different behavior of the student. For example, how responsible does the apprentice work? How well she works in a team? Her planning and organizational skills? Whether she can work independently and others. This again shall be assessed and marked by the trainer. The mark will be written in the second column. The truth is that only technical skills and knowledge are not enough to do a job satisfactorily. It matters to the employer how the attitude of an apprentice is when carrying out a task. Therefore, it is also very important to keep a job long term. That is why those attitudes also need to be evaluated. By providing feedback to the apprentice, he knows what he needs to improve in order to meet the requirements. We are almost at the end of Module 7. So to summarize, I would like to ask you, what are the advantages of using a competency-based in-company training plan? If you use a competency-based structure to evaluate the performance of an apprentice, it becomes an easy tool of assessing and marking the apprentice's competencies. That is also helpful for in-company trainers who often have little time and plenty of other responsibilities beyond training people. That way, they know which activities they can carry out to assess the specific competency and don't just evaluate with a general good or bad. It also makes it easier to compare the competencies of the apprentices as mentioned before. In addition, the specific tasks written in the training plan can help the apprentice as an orientation. That way, they know which goals they should reach. This shows that there are several reasons why an in-company training plan should be based on competencies. Now I would like to invite the ones who hadn't had enough yet to do this exercise. Think about a trait you're familiar with. Which competencies would you point out and how would you write it down in a training plan? Thank you for joining me. I hope you could benefit from this presentation. See you again soon in our seminar, Implementation of Dual Vocational Education and Training. If you want further information about dual training, I invite you to see our other videos or contact us via our homepage www.bdv.de. bive.de.